My friends, the Chief of Staff of the Army entered Gaza today and made a statement that I want you to hear in its entirety. He said that the hunt for the terrorists behind October 7th continues, and that everyone who took part in that massacre will spend their lives being hunted until they are removed from the board. And he said more, this is a high priority mission with the command and the entire army committed to it. And just yesterday, this moved from speech to operation. I'm going to tell you target by target, and in this live stream, I'll also tell you about the oil tanker that was hit last night and was left stranded in the middle of the sea. I'll tell you that the foreign general who was in Iran, that general from Pakistan who went to visit Iran, has already left with an answer in hand. I'm going to show you here the two things that happened in Syria today. One of them was the Israeli defense minister going up Mount Hermon to send a direct message to President El Jolani over there in Syria. And I'm also going to show you what's happening with the American embassies in this region. The information that came out today changes what we knew yesterday. And it's good. It's good news, but with a big caveat. And finally, I have here a post from the American president published just a few hours ago about the mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Live from Israel, right from where everything is happening, organizing the chaos of information for you. Local time, 1 in the morning. Leave your like now at the beginning so you don't forget to do it later. Check if your subscription is still active and turn on the notification bell because this story here takes a new turn almost every hour. Actually, almost every minute something new happens here. Let's go straight to Gaza and look at what happened in the last few days, which is proof of what the Chief of Staff said today. Yesterday afternoon, in the central region of the Gaza Strip, the Air Force targeted a terrorist from Hamas's Nurba force, the same force that invaded Israel on October 7th. According to the army, this terrorist personally took part in that invasion. The attack also targeted a second terrorist who invaded Israel that day and apparently managed to survive, at least for now. Just yesterday, the army released information about another type of operation, and this one shows the method used by the terrorist organization Hamas. Two mosques were hit, one in Gaza City and the other in the center of the strip. And why were two mosques hit? You must be asking yourself that question right now. According to the army, Hamas was using those mosques. We know they do this to store dozens of rifles, assault rifles, and other anti-tank weapons. It's not a place of prayer being targeted by chance. It's a place of prayer turned into a weapons depot by those who control that territory. And the Israeli army was very clear. Hamas systematically uses civilian buildings, and mosques are included in that as well. And here's a question that almost no one asks. If someone sets up a rifle depot inside a mosque, are they protecting the people there or using them as a shield? Let us know in the comments. And you must also be wondering why the sequence happened now after weeks of almost absolute silence in the Gaza Strip. It all started, as I've already mentioned here, but I'll repeat it. It all started with the kites and balloons. I explained this in detail in yesterday's live, but I'll sum it up here in 3 lines for those who didn't see it and just landed here out of nowhere. First, they launch plain kites. Then, to see if anyone reacts, right? If the army reacts. If the Air Force reacts, then come incendiary kites that burn crops in the area, and then kites with explosives attached. And here I answer a question that came up a lot in the comments of my last live. How do they direct these balloons with bombs inside or these kites? How do they do that? Does it work like a drone? The answer is that they don't direct them. It's not controlled by remote control. They just release them and let the wind carry them. Wherever it lands, it lands. It can fall in a field, it can fall in a backyard because it has already happened, guys. It has already fallen in fields, in backyards, in factories. It has even fallen in a kindergarten in that region. For those who release it, it doesn't make any difference where it hits. And that's exactly where the seriousness of the situation lies. A device no one controls, thrown into the wind, toward a community where there are children playing in the street. And when no one responds to any of this, something much bigger comes right after. That's how it was before October 7th. And this time, the government decided not to wait until it got to that point. That's why the new order is that kites and balloons are now treated as explosive drones, even if there's nothing attached to them. And that's the same logic of pesting the other side's reaction that you just saw. That same logic is also happening at sea there in the Strait of Hormuz. But this time it wasn't a kite, it was an oil tanker. The ship was hit right after we finished yesterday's live stream on Monday night, just a few miles off the east coast of Oman. The organization that reported it was the British group that monitors maritime traffic in that region. The projectile was not identified and it hit the ship's engine, meaning it was something surgical and precise. Pay attention to this because it's not just any detail, folks. Whoever hits the engine doesn't want to sink the ship, they want to hit the engine, they want it to stop where it is. A tanker stopped in the middle of the route is an obstacle. Remember, this route isn't as big as it seems. A tanker stranded there is basically an obstacle. There's a risk of oil or petroleum leakage, and it's also a photo that goes around the world. The crew, according to reports, is fine. The entire crew was removed from this tanker, and so far there have been no reports of environmental damage, at least at this point, because we've already had reports of environmental damage there inside the Gulf, in the Gulf region, here, in this region, right here, of the Gulf, okay? And look where this happened, this last attack that happened there in the strait. I'll show you here. It happened exactly where? It wasn't in Iranian waters, it was outside on the coast of Oman, right here, look. In this region where all this mess is happening, which is exactly the route that ships started using to avoid the Iranian side, to avoid Iranian drones. And I told you about this here. Last week, more than 80 of the crossings were going through the Oman side or are passing through the Oman side. And here's another piece of data that shows the scale of this whole story. Since the beginning of this war, on February 28th, at least 17 merchant ships have been damaged in that region, and 7 of them were abandoned by their crew. In other words, they're still out there somewhere in the middle of that sea. 2 of them were captured, 2 ships were taken by the Iranians, and 12 sailors died or are missing. These men aren't soldiers from any army. They're Filipinos, Indians, Greeks, Ukrainians, and there are even some Brazilians among them. Okay? Guys who work on ships to support their families back home. No one in the world is marching for them. And there's no flotilla for these guys who are stuck at sea and facing all this risk. And I also want to know your opinion about this. Write in the comments if you've ever seen any big headline about these 12 sailors who are missing or dead. And I bet you haven't. And why missing and dead? Everyone must be asking. Are they missing or did they die? These are people from various places around the world, so it takes a long time to gather this information from so many different countries that operate in this region. And I bet you haven't read anything about this. And now, the detail that connects the oil tanker to the rest of our live stream. This attack happened exactly while the Pakistani delegation was finishing its meetings in Iran. Remember the meeting they went there for, to try to reach some kind of agreement? The chief of the Pakistani army was in Iran, sitting with the Iranian president and the president of the parliament, Ghalibaf. He went to try to pave the way for negotiations with the Americans. And on the same night, someone shot at an oil tanker at the exit of the strait. I can't tell you now who fired. You can imagine who fired. Of course, it was Iran, but no one claimed responsibility for the shot. But I can ask you the question that matters: who benefits from shooting while the mediator? He's still there in the room, meeting with the Iranians. And the most likely answer is the one I've already been giving you here in the last few live streams. There isn't just one Iran, there are two. There's a side that hosts the mediator and talks about the economy, about a population going hungry, about agreement, and there's the side that gives the orders at sea and doesn't want any agreement because agreement takes away their power. While these two sides don't resolve things, the ones in charge, every advance at the table will be accompanied by shots fired into the water. And that's why I don't believe in any agreement being signed until this internal fight is over. There won't be any agreement, folks. You can disagree with me here and tell me in the comments if you think there will be an agreement this year, because I don't believe there will be. The Pakistani general ended his visit today. He brought the American message in and now returns with the Iranian response in hand. And the response, in part, we can say that it leaked, at least a part of it. The head of the Iranian National Security Council told him that it's the Americans who need to change their behavior, and said that the United States has to take concrete steps to fulfill the memorandum signed in June. Translating into everyday English, the regime is shifting the blame and asking the other side to give in first. In other words, the general went back home, back to Pakistan, empty handed, with nothing for the Americans. He went in carrying American demands, most likely, and came out carrying Iranian demands. And on the same day, there was also a discreet move from a small neighboring country. The foreign minister of Oman also landed in Iran today to discuss the strait. This topic isn't new for those who follow the channel. I've been telling you about it since the beginning of this month. What changed today is that the two countries reached a joint proposal after weeks of stalled talks. Just a reminder, Oman and Iran are negotiating, and it has nothing to do with the United States. The idea is a temporary navigation channel. They're still discussing it, crossing the strait operated by both sides. I'm not going to tell you this will solve the crisis because it won't. There have been similar plans before and nothing ever came of them. But there's a detail in this proposal, this new proposal, that's worth paying attention to. Accepting a channel managed together with Oman means the regime is admitting that it no longer controls that passage on its own, right? And that's the contradiction I want to show you now. Because it became clear in what the regime said after yesterday's sanctions. Before that, a quick request for you. If you're understanding this story better than you would have before you came to this channel, right? Leave your like now. It only takes a second and it helps me a lot. Let's go. And there's something here I want you to compare with me. Yesterday, they said that the economic war was nothing new to them and that it's already been 47 years of this. Do you remember that? And they said that the Americans are just trying to create a sense of defeat in the minds of the Iranian people. That's what they said yesterday. And today, the same regime is doing three things at the same time, and all three contradict each other. The first is to say that the sanctions are absolutely worthless. The second is to threaten anyone who complies with these sanctions that, according to them, are worthless. So, why do you threaten if they are worthless? And the third is to host a foreign mediator, a Pakistani one, to try to get out of these new sanctions that have started. No one does these three things together if they're comfortable. And there was a detail today in what the American side said that I haven't seen anyone comment on either. The United States Secretary of Defense talked about the aircraft carrier that's been in that region for months. And he used a word that's quite unusual for a minister of that level. He said that mission has been too tough for the crew. And this is the kind of phrase, my friends, that seems small but isn't, and sometimes goes unnoticed. An aircraft carrier is not a hotel. For those who think it looks like a hotel, it's not a hotel. And American sailors have been away from home much longer than expected. And I mention this here because the other side of the equation is that maintaining a blockade is also expensive for those enforcing it. It seems there was also an exchange just now, recently these days, or there'll be an exchange of aircraft carriers. And the other aircraft carrier is going to take a vacation on the beaches of Thailand, something like that. And then it will return again to the Strait of Hormuz. But they've been away from home for a long time. But the bill for this package doesn't depend only on Iran, guys. It doesn't. It depends on who obeys, who's out there. And then the world split into two very separate groups. It starts with the Arab neighbors because today they spoke. And what they said was much colder than many people expected. Qatar called the new American sanctions a unilateral measure. The spokesperson for the government there said that contacts with both sides are still ongoing, but also said that there has been no progress in mediation in recent weeks. And he added that there is coordination among the Gulf countries to deal with any scenario of escalation. Saudi Arabia took a different path, stayed out of this round of mediation, and was in no rush to increase economic pressure on Iran. And the Gulf countries that invested billions in pipelines to avoid the strait also did not comment at all on the new American package. And now I'll tell you what I think about all of this. Because here's the truth that no one says out loud. These countries, my friends, are not sitting on the fence because they're unsure. They're really sitting on the fence out of fear of Iran. We know that. And I'll explain to you why this isn't going to change anytime soon. The rivalry between them and the Iranian regime didn't start with this war and didn't start in this century. On one side are the Sunni countries. On the other is Iran's Shia regime. And this dispute has lasted for almost or more than 1,400 years. They hate each other, and that's no secret to anyone here in this region. But hating is not the same as confronting. In recent months, these same countries saw Iran attack an American base inside their territory. They saw a missile fall in their cities, in front of hotels, right at the hotel entrance. There, at that Atlantis, in the United Arab Emirates, and they saw their state company's ship get hit. And the response every time was just a statement of condemnation, a statement of solidarity, a statement saying they reserve the right to respond. The response never comes, and the real response never came. We had a few attacks there, according to the media, from Saudi Arabia, some attacks from the United Arab Emirates, some attacks from Kuwait. but nothing real that could be called an offensive war against Iran.
It's not a lack of money because they have plenty of money. We know that. It's a lack of military force assembled for this. And it's a lack of political courage to openly take on that confrontation before their own people.
That's why they stay on the fence. They silently hope that the Americans will solve this problem and don't sign off on anything at all. And there's a very practical reason for that too. The American bases and the energy infrastructure are in their backyard, literally, and not in the American backyard. If the regime decides to retaliate against the siege, the first target won't be New York. It'll be the neighboring country's port, refinery, and oil field across the sea. That's the truth. That's the truth, folks. And notice how that tone also changes depending on the subject. When ships from the Emirates were hit in the Strait last week, the council that brings together the Gulf countries called it a dangerous and unacceptable escalation. Qatar said that the strait cannot be used as a bargaining chip and demanded its reopening without conditions. Saudi Arabia condemned it in the strongest terms and held Iran responsible for the consequences. Now, notice the difference. When the ship that was hit was theirs, the condemnation came with the name of the responsible party, which is Iran. When it's the Americans applying pressure, with the sanctions, with these new sanctions, the word unilateral comes up and there's a call for a peaceful solution. This isn't inconsistency, it's the calculation of someone who lives next to an aggressive neighbor. They talk tough after they've already been hit and talk softly when they might provoke the next attack. On the other side of the world, the reaction was different and it came today. China publicly criticized the new American sanctions, and that's no surprise to us, right? Most of the money that still goes into Iran comes from there, and the American targets are precisely the companies that make this bridge between Iran and China. And Europe has a legal problem with this whole story that almost no one is talking about either. There is a European law. I didn't know about this law either. I found out about it today. There is a law over there called the Blocking Statute, which prohibits European companies from complying with American sanctions against Iran without authorization from Brussels. Check this out, guys. It's not an opinion, it's a law in effect. And the European court has already decided that a company that breaks a contract with Iran needs to justify it for another reason, not because of American sanctions. In other words, the European company is stuck, we can literally say, between two laws. If it obeys the Americans, it violates European law. If it obeys the Europeans, it loses access to the dollar. And that's why, so far, no European government has announced that it will close an Iranian bank branch in its territory. And here's another detail worth mentioning, that the Secretary of the Treasury named names. He mentioned the largest Iranian state owned bank and said that every branch of that bank has to be closed anywhere in the world. And that's where this story will be decided, folks. Not in the speeches, but in who follows the list and who pretends like the Europeans that they're not seeing it. I'm going to follow this here, bank by bank, country by country, and tell you what's going to happen from now on. And there's also a thermometer that has already given the preliminary answer, which is the price of oil. Pay close attention. After the announcement of the new sanctions, the price per barrel dropped by more than 2 and keeps falling. Let's see how oil is doing right now at this exact moment. Let's open it here. Look at the price of oil. It's already at 88. Is that right? 88.58. In other words, the price of Brent crude oil is already dropping. It already hit 93. Remember? So it fell by 2 yesterday and keeps falling today. Brent crude oil is now around 88 at its lowest point since the 19th. That means the market looked at that package of sanctions and concluded that for now, it doesn't take any oil off the market today. It's just sanctions, nothing more than that. There probably won't be a war. And the reason is simple. So far, no country has been sanctioned either. No government was mentioned by name and no public deadline was given to anyone. You might be watching this video in the future, and by then, maybe some country has already been sanctioned or some company has actually been sanctioned because of some service provided to Iran. What exists for now is a list of 60 companies and people and the threat to those who continue. I'm pointing this out here because it's the counterpoint to what I've shown you so far. The announcement was big in the speech, actually huge, historic as they called it, but it's still small on paper. Its real size will depend on what comes in the next few days. And there's also a better gauge than any statement from these governments, which is where they put their own people. That's why I want to talk to you here about the American embassies, which is the subject that tells me the most about the future, about what to expect from now on. And here I need to separate two things that the headlines always mix up.
The diplomat and his family.
Let's go in order here, okay? When this war started, the Americans ordered non essential personnel and families to leave the region. This applied to Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Qatar, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The embassy in Kuwait even suspended everything, all services in March, and only resumed emergency and urgent services at the end of June. The embassy in Oman operated under a system where employees could leave if they wanted to, meaning they could go back to the United States if they wished. It wasn't an order. And today, new information came out that changes what we knew until yesterday. A major newspaper in the United States reported that the United States is preparing to send diplomats back to embassies in several countries in the region, and Israel is also on that list. And this is the most concrete sign that has appeared this entire week. No government sends diplomats back to a place where they believe missiles could start falling again at any moment. Sending diplomats back is the most concrete way the government has to say that the danger in the region has decreased. But there's a detail in the same report, and that's what puts the brakes on this whole story. Most embassies will continue to operate with fewer staff than usual, and the restrictions on bringing families remain in place because the security risk is still high. Let's translate this into real life, folks. The diplomat will return, but his family, his wife, husband, children will not. Only the diplomat. It's not a closed embassy, and it's not an embassy operating normally either. It's an embassy running with only the essentials and without a fully set up residence. And that's how the government says two things at the same time. The first, I'm less convinced there's going to be a major war tomorrow. The second, I still don't trust enough to bring the whole family back. And if the Americans are recalculating the risk from afar, here we're measuring that risk in a different way. We measure it by what happens at the border. And today, there was movement on both. Pay attention, folks. Let's start with Lebanon, where the work hasn't stopped for a single day. In the last few hours, there was a series of controlled explosions in the south of the country, especially in two cities. And throughout the day, several fighter jet and drone attacks were reported in the same region. For those who think the war ended over there by Lebanon, it hasn't ended, folks. There was also a control explosion over there, several explosions. You probably know someone who lives up there in northern Israel. Lots of explosions. That means the troops find a depot, tunnel, or launcher and destroy it right there. Right there on the spot. Okay, so they don't wait long. They go there and destroy everything, whether it's a tunnel, a house full of bombs, or a launcher ready to be fired. This has been happening non-stop for weeks, and that's how you dismantle a structure buried under a house. And in Syria, two things happened today that only make sense if you look at them together. The first is that the United States officially removed Syria from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism. This comes just a few days after that meeting between the Syrian foreign minister and the head of Mossad. You remember that happened in Jordan? And it also comes in the midst of attempts to reach a security agreement between Israel and Syria. The Syrian president, Al-Julani, the terrorist in a suit, publicly thanked the American president and the Turkish ambassador to Syria. He rushed to say that this is the biggest step. It's of the utmost importance for Syria to be accepted back into the international community. The second thing happened at the top of Mount Hermon. For those who don't know, Mount Hermon is the highest mountain in Israel where there's snow, right? And it also extends into Syria. Let me pull up the map here. It's right here. Look, here in this little corner. See? Here is Syria on this side, Lebanon here, the Golan Heights down here, and this is Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is at this point here, and it happened there. It was a visit from Israel's Minister of Defense himself. He went right into Syria, folks. The Israeli minister set foot right there in that spot. He went up there, and from there he sent a public message addressed to the Syrian president. He said that Israel will not leave Mount Hermon or the security zone as long as there are jihadist threats against the country. And he left an even more direct statement, folks. He said that when the Syrian president wakes up in the morning at the palace and looks up, he'll see the Israeli army right there on Hermon. In other words, when he wakes up there in Damascus and looks up, he'll be able to see it right here. He'll be able to see Mount Hermon. I think you can see it. For him to have said that, it's probably possible to see Mount Hermon from Damascus, which is right here. He also pointed out that Israel has already acted against Turkey's attempt to settle in Syria and said it will continue to act. Put those two pieces of news together and you'll understand the game. The Americans are giving Syria the diplomatic prize it wanted, which is being removed from the list of countries that support terror. And on the same day, Israel announces that the prize doesn't change anything on the ground.
And while Israel is taking a stand in the north, there's another power taking a stand right here on our side, folks, on the map.
And this is where the topic of Egypt and China comes up again because new details came out today about that training I mentioned to you yesterday on the live stream. Yesterday, I told you that Chinese fighter jets trained in combat against French fighter jets from the Egyptian Air Force. And today, the rest of that story came out, and it's much bigger than it seemed. That exercise isn't just for a day.
I think I said yesterday it was a 1 day exercise. It wasn't a 1 day exercise. It started on Saturday and will go until the beginning of September. And it's happening at several air bases in Egypt, not just in one place.
And it's not the first time, okay? It's not the first time. This is the second edition because last year it already happened once with much older Chinese planes. And now they're using the most modern ones. This isn't an isolated event, it's a program in the making. We have to keep an eye on this, folks. Now, just look at what China brought there. They brought fighter jets, a tanker plane, an early warning aircraft, a heavy transport plane, an electronic warfare aircraft, and helicopters. Not just one helicopter, helicopters, several. The trip was over 6,000 kilometers, crossing two continents and four countries in about a 9-hour flight. And during the journey, the Chinese tanker plane refueled the fighter jets in the air, including two jets at the same time. And that's exactly what gives range, as we know, to an air force. Without a tanker plane, no fighter jet can go far and it can't make it back either. China has just trained this capability 6,000 kilometers from home, right in our neighborhood. And the Chinese military themselves made it very clear what they were testing there. They talked about long range projection and about the ability to quickly set up far from home. In other words, they went to Egypt, arrived in Egypt, and managed to quickly set up their own base there for training. And they said that the training was with all these planes operating together as a single force. And the Chinese press wrote that this kind of training far from home is no longer the exception and is becoming routine. Routine is the word that changes the meaning of all this. It's not just a one time demonstration for a photo op, it's routine training, folks. Routine training by a power that's learning to operate on the other side of the world, in the skies of our neighbor right next door, against Western technology. And people in the West are still asleep, right? While all this is happening in the sky, another piece of news came out. Is that post I promised you at the beginning, published just a few hours ago. The American president wrote that the Navy just informed him of something extremely important. All the mines have been removed or destroyed from the international waters of the Strait of Hormuz. According to him, he said that Iran was warned of the following: any ship or boat that lays a new mine will be destroyed immediately and systematically. He also said that they are monitoring every square inch of the strait with the US Space Force and added that they are also watching that mountain, that Pickaxe Mountain, where the nuclear program is located, and the other three sites that have already been destroyed. He concluded by saying that tolerance for mines is now zero, and this post is not just a celebration. If the water is clean and monitored, any new explosion on a ship is no longer a mystery, right, folks? Because it's not a mine going off anymore, it's someone who fired at the ship. The blame now has a clear address.
And that's why the tanker hit last night outside the strait of the coast of Oman is so troubling. Outside the strait, there are no cleared mines, no sweeping, and no promises at all. And now I'm going to tell you what I think about everything I've shown you here today on this live stream. In my view, the American president's plan right now is not war. It's not war. He has stepped down from that level. The plan is to drag the Iranians to the negotiating table through economic pressure without needing a single plane in the air. That's why yesterday's package has more threats than real punishment, and that's why they gave a deadline instead of striking all at once. He wants the regime to come to the table broken, meaning to the negotiating table already out of money and hungry, not destroyed. Now, if this doesn't work the way they expect, then I do see another scenario opening up because I don't think this is going to work. Honestly, I don't think this is going to work. Despite everything that could happen inside Iran, the hunger, the lack of everything, there won't be any money. In short, it won't work. And then, yes, the military campaign comes back, and it comes back with a ready made justification. We tried everything. But there's a calendar detail that weighs heavily in all of this, and almost no one is putting it on the table. The closer we get to the elections in the US and even ours here, but especially theirs, the harder it gets to start a major conflict here in our region. Unless it's a 2 week conflict, a quick conflict, something quick, trying to wrap it up in 2 weeks. No president wants to start a campaign with soldiers coming back in coffins and expensive gas at the pump. Do you agree with me? So, this window that exists now won't stay open forever. And both sides know that. The one applying pressure knows there's a deadline, and the one taking the hits knows they need to hold out until that deadline passes. And this is where I want to raise a possibility that I absolutely don't rule out.
The Iranian regime also knows how to read an election calendar, and they read it very well. If they conclude that economic pressure will break the country before the election, there is a tempting path on their side.
Attacking a target in the Gulf, forcing a major response, and dragging the American president into an open war right in the middle of the campaign.
And there's no candidate who can survive a campaign with American soldiers dying here in the Middle East and expensive gas at the pump back home.
In other words, the regime would lose militarily, that's a fact, but it could politically take down the man who's tightening the noose around its neck. And I'm not telling you that's what's going to happen. I'm just saying it's a possible move. And anyone who's been following this regime for years has seen it choose the most destructive path just to survive a little longer. And this is where I wrap up with our Hebrew word of the day, and it's the mama. The mama. It's a bit harder to say this word. You can barely hear the D. Yeah, it's like the mama. The mama means silence. But it's not the silence, it's not sheket. Okay, it's not the same kind of silence. The mama is the silence of someone who is, it's not the silence of someone who is at peace. Okay, it's that heavy silence. Like when everything stops and you feel like something is about to happen next.
And it was this kind of silence that settled over this region this week. And it's still continuing throughout this whole week. No sirens, no big headlines in the world, no announced operation.
And underneath that silence, everything I showed you in this live stream lies. A ship stopped at sea, and a general, a Pakistani, leaving Iran with an answer in his hand. An Israeli minister at the top of Mount Hermon on the Syrian side. And a Chinese fighter jet training over neighboring Egypt. And I'm still here, straight from the Judean mountains, digging up every piece of this story in 4 languages to bring it to you before it turns into a twisted headline on your side. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this live with your family group chat, folks. Let's quickly move on to the comments. Teresina, thank you for the super sticker. Adriano, thank you. Eunice, thank you. Good evening, David and all the friends. Roosevelt, Medeiros, thank you.
Thank you for the super chat.
Ludus, Granhai. I thank David, Mexer, and all your team for your work. Thank you, my friend, from the bottom of my heart.
Only Spanish from Barcelona, but I love Israel. Thanks, my friend. Thank you. Thank you. Eunice, David, and Bruno Mortadella are never missing. Bruno Mortadella is never missing. He loves the best information channel about the Middle East. Exactly. Mortadella never misses a live stream. He's always here. Right, Bruno? Thanks, my brother. But leave your dislike there. Do your part too. And don't forget, Bruno, to vote there at Ibeshte, okay? Don't forget to vote at Ibeshte, which will start again soon on the 20th. I think it's on the 28th, the 27th, or the 28th. I just checked now and I didn't see anything. I think it's on the 26th. Could it be? If it's today, on the 26th, there with you. Now, here is today's date, right? If it is, I'll let you know tomorrow on the live here, in the morning, around noon. I'll send you the link. If there's a link, I don't know how the rules work from now on. If it's a popular vote, or if it's an academy vote. There's this academy vote thing. But there's something important in this whole story. They removed, do you remember it was Davia Meskani / Viva Israel? They removed the name Viva Israel. There's no more Viva Israel. Now it's just Davi al-Meshkani. They took that out. It lasted a long time, actually. I thought it lasted too long, right? They let that name stay there for a while, but now they've removed it. It's just Davi al-Meskani now. I have no control over that. I don't even know who to talk to in that place. Anyway, there's absolutely nothing I can do about that. I can only tell you here what happened over there. Davi, thank you for your live streams. I never miss one. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Stay strong, Davi. There's a Pasokinia spy here. There's always a Pasokinia spy here. They're always those guys. But I appreciate their presence. After all, it's thanks to these guys, these mortadellas, who come here and write a bunch of nonsense that YouTube ends up showing this video to more people. And it ends up reaching you who didn't even know this channel existed. Right? Every day, someone new shows up and says, I just discovered the channel today. I just discovered the channel today. There are a lot of people in Brazil, right? And thanks to Mortadella, who's present on this channel, he really helps us get this video to more people on our big planet Earth. To everyone who speaks Portuguese, hugs to all my friends, and see you at the next live stream.